Good evening, everybody. As you can see, it's nighttime outside. You can see the reflections in the window, but that's fine. This is my setup now. I got hardwood floors, which I will always be grateful for. But anyways, to it. Welcome back to Mo's Bros Reviews. I know we've been off air for a little while. There's been kind of some things going on in the personal lives that we're all getting back into the swing of things. And I'd like to start off here by reviewing the first 7 books in the Horus Heresy series by the Black Library. There's or where is it? There's our logo. If you remember it, it's still functional. You can still look us up at Mo's Bros Reviews. Please like or subscribe if you enjoyed this video or if you found it useful for if you want to read these books or not. Anyways, so the first 7 books in order go as Horus Rising, False Gods, Galaxy in Flames, The Flight of the Eisenstein, Fulgrim, Descent of Angels, and Legion. I read all these books back to back over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks. So I'd say some of them might have run together a little bit, but I think that's kind of a testament to the writing of these authors and how they're able to bring such a broad series together into one very specific storytelling endeavor. But of course, we'll start with the first one, Horus Rising. I really enjoyed this book. It really brings you into the style of writing that we can expect from the 40K Black Library series, or the Horus Heresy series more specifically. It gives you a good idea of what a Space Marine Legion is like, the kind of brotherhood that they show, and kind of how these aren't just automatons. It really caught me off guard how much character each person had first going into this. But I think that's important to notice because there is a civil war at the other end of it. I don't think you can have a civil war if you don't have a lot of character amongst your ranks. Um, it becomes pretty evident who are the good guys and who are the bad guys pretty quickly. I would say that's one of the weaknesses of the series so far, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. But just to say, this one was very good. The storyline is really good. The characterizations are very good, and the writing is excellent. There's a few low points I think with some of the dialogue and some of the characterization. Like I said, it's a little bit too on the head as you would expect from a space marine, but these are larger than life characters. They have to have larger than life personalities, and as is kind of a theme throughout the rest of the series, each space marine, because they are superhuman and have superhuman abilities, their personalities are exaggerated in that same fashion. The second series, or False Gods, the second book, uh, kind of want to pile the first 3 in there because the story kind of does run together in the 3 books. They they do a good job of kind of building up tension throughout the 3 books and kind of showing you the direction that everything is taking. So the second book, I think, was the most important. I would say the first one kind of sets everything up. The second one is where a lot of the big reveals happen. The Horus's fall to chaos, his descent into madness, as they like to call it, which personally I was not a fan of. I think they could have done a much better job. I don't know if it's Graham McNeil as an author that had an issue here, or if it was just the nature of the story. I'd say that it's a little disappointing to see how simply they made this guy fall to the darkness, especially considering how powerful he's supposed to be, both mentally and physically, and even kind of psychically attuned. So you would think he would have some sort of uh, immunity towards this, or even the kind of situation where you see these people giving their lives for the emperor and giving their lives for humanity in general. It's hard to kind of believe that this person wouldn't just give his life to 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 meet the ends and the goals of the emperor and humanity as a whole. There was a bit of a like a red herring situation there when he goes into his descent, and I really didn't appreciate it. The whole book is good, but it was hard to get past just the simplicity with which they approached his fall to darkness. There wasn't it's a lot of brotherly rivalry, some issues with direction of your command and things like that. That I guess you can kind of draw some correlations to the real world with. But all in all, I think his betrayal of mankind and his betrayal of the emperor was just a little too human overall. Um, so I think I'll leave it at that for book 2. I think it was a great book up until just that moment. So the first 2 acts are amazing. Uh, kind of a few kind of just as planned situations that you can kind of overlook if you're willing to. But overall, if you're looking for a perfect tight story with no plot holes, this isn't it. But if you're looking for a good Space Marine book, a good Legion book, it's there. The characterization is there. The combat is there. The combat is wonderful in all three of these first books. But let me move to the third one, just to since these are kind of all in together. Galaxy in Flames. I'd say this is of the first three, my second favorite. It does show the final moments of the pre-heresy Imperium, everything leading up to that moment, and it does a very good job of that. I was very appreciative of the combat that they showed, the difficulty that they showed with the loyalists versus the rebels, obviously, and making the decisions that they made and actually destroying each other. Again, this is a little bit that kind of copped out on it and how easy it was for them to make this transition from loyalist to traitor marine or heretical marine or however you want to put it. But there are a lot of points that are kind of wrapped up in this one from the second one. Little things that you wouldn't expect either. I don't want to go into details because it's the little things that kind of carry over from the first three books that really kind of give you an idea of the scope of this conflict and kind of the small steps that were being taken to prepare these people for making such a large transition from their loyalist side to eventually their bad guy side. Um, so I would say if you're gonna read the first three books, read them back to back to back. It's almost in my head. It's kind of hard to differentiate the three from each other because the events in them are so tied together, and it just follows such a tight series of characters, like the Mournival, Horus, the Iris Day Titan. You know, there's a lot of surprises there. A lot of things that in other universes you would have expected to go maybe towards the good guys, but it's going to be the bad guys that kind of initiate the victories. You can kind of expect where it's going, but still it catches you off guard in a lot of places. There's a lot of very good descriptions of for lack of a better term, death. As certain characters are killed off, they it's there are some tearjerker moments actually, if I guess for a man, depending on how you look at it. But it was overall very strong in entertainment, not very strong in like a philosophical side. I don't think that's what anybody's going into these books for to begin with, but not very strong in a philosophical side. And it doesn't really make you think on the nature of brotherhood or loyalty or anything like that. They really do kind of just pull the rug out from under you on the what causes the heresy and how it goes so far south so quickly. Um, and that's I'd have to say it was my biggest problem with these, which is actually a huge problem. But the writing is so strong and the universe is already so strong and established that they can actually surpass that kind of red herring mentality they have, the simple fixes that they've brought through on this book to get everybody to be so evil. I think chaos is characterized very well in a few places in this book, and it's characterized as just too easily capable of influencing the mortal realms, and I think that's the main issue. Uh, Moving on to book four, this is kind of where you start stepping out of those initial areas of book three. I think this one has by far the best characterization of chaos of the first four books. So the first half of the book kind of takes place within the first three books, and the second half of the book takes place after the Battle of Isfahan. And I think the second half is stronger for it. This is book four. You've already read three books of everything going on in the Isfahan system and all the things that led to Horus's downfall and the heresy in general. And you get kind of tired of it, honestly. You're burnt out by book four that it even starts that way. You want to start exactly where you saw the Flight of Einstein begin in book three, but instead it does go back a little bit in time to characterize some of the characters. And if you ask me to kind of just deliver some cheap chapters where you get some character recognition and like some cameos where you can say, "Hey, I know that guy," and that's not. It felt a little cheap for the first half, to be completely frank. The second half was really good, but uh, it was kind of a slog to get through the first half, even though the characters in this book are probably the best so far. Garrow, I don't think anybody's gonna say they don't like Garrow. Um, you get to see a few of the other characters that you like from the first three books. I won't name which ones, but yeah, I recommend this one. You can skim the first half honestly, but the second half is great. Uh, the idea in the first 4 books that they want to give you different perspectives onto the same event to give you an idea of how it's going through. It's a good idea, but it's not. They don't execute perfectly because it feels kind of like when you watch a sitcom like Friends or Seinfeld or something, and they have the callback episodes, where there's all these flashbacks. There's a few points in these books where it just feels kind of like a flashback from a different point of view, and just using the names for characterization and just cheap thrills really. So that brings us to book 5, which is by far my favorite book in the entire series so far. I know people say this book is kind of gross and that it's kind of an abuse of what an abuse of writing privilege or 40K or whatever. It's exactly what you would expect Slanesh to be. If you're offended by gore or some sort of like sexism or narcissism or anything like that, it's not the book for you. Um, but just don't be offended. It's art. It's a book. Just read it for what it is. And honestly, this was the first book that really does make you think on a philosophical level. There's a few things that I think kind of show the narcissism that humanity is capable of, and I think it really does a good job of showing how a superhuman person with super intellect and super ability to kind of absorb whatever is thrown at them would really go. I mean, you hear stories of celebrities that try and take things to excess and they end up dying in a bathtub or something like that. This is what would happen if a celebrity was functionally immortal, I believe. I think that's kind of where it was taken to. Um, there's the combat again is amazing. I think there's one fight scene in this book in particular where Fulgrim kind of shows his full ability, albeit with some demonic help, and it really is an impressive scene from start to finish. It introduces a few of the other races that are common throughout the rest of Warhammer, and it does them justice to their full ability. And it really does help bring kind of some of the things that you see on the tabletop and maybe in some of the actual Warhammer games, the Dawn of War games, and it helps you really flesh it out and kind of bring those ideas to life. And I'll discuss that later on in the video, but I would say if you have to start reading the 40K series and you know about Warhammer and or the Horus Heresy series and you already know about Warhammer, you kind of know where it's coming from, and you just want to dive in and just have a good book to read. This as a standalone novel is amazing. Again, it does cover some of the Isvan stuff, but in such a light manner, and it takes it to a much further conclusion towards the end. So it does push the story along. So I highly recommend this one. It's the longest of the first 7. It's easily the most exciting, if you ask me. It really characterizes some Marines that I think seem most human. Um, they the other ones that like the Death Guard and some of the other ones are just kind of obvious, but the Emperor's Children pre-heresy are I think what we would expect out of, these immortal warriors. Uh yeah, absolutely it's worth a read. Uh Pop it in, give it a run. And if you have a friend that doesn't know a lot about Warhammer and really wants to get an idea of what the Warhammer universe is, both from like a civilian side, from a philosophical side, and from a space marine side, I think this is probably the best book because it gives a good idea of chaos, like the depravity of chaos, the the extents that space marines are willing to take things to complete their vision, their kind of disregard for mortals. Uh it's it's honestly a fantastic book. I think it gets kind of lost in this first set, but of the first 7, this is my favorite by far, just by such a long shot. It was so good that I was able to even talk to about it with my girlfriend and people at work. Kind of the parallels that I was drawing with certain characters and certain items in the book to how they affect us. How they kind of parallel to like our cell phones or kind of our vain existence that we have nowadays with Facebook and Twitter and all that. Uh, I think it's kind of a far parallel that I took it to. It's not a very obvious thing to notice, but I think it's there if you want it to be. Uh, Book 6, Descent of Angels. It's just a good story. There's not much to it there. doesn't really provide that much context to the rest of the universe. It gives you the Dark Angels start and the homeworld of Caliban. I gotta say, just the difference in writing style makes it fantastic. It follows one character the whole time. The difference in setting makes it just a breath of fresh air. And honestly, if there was more books like this one throughout, peppered throughout, I think we would see more of these books selling, or I think they'd be easier to read. Um, Honestly, I think it was very strong in the first half before the whole, Descent of Angel event actually happens. But after that point, it kind of peters off, if you ask me. I think they even kind of joke about it in the book a little bit, that it feels like it's petering off in itself. But the first half, the events on Caliban or Caliban, however you want to pronounce it, are are absolutely just a good short story. If you want to stop as soon as the descent happens, you're good. But the first half is a good short story to kind of give you a different idea of the Warhammer universe, what it's like on the worlds before the Imperium shows up, what kind of struggles there are, what it's like for a regular population to see a Primarch, which it's a good story. It's yeah, I think the writing is relatively strong. It's kind of weak in its characterization of the children in the novel. The story begins by following, I think, a 9-year-old, and he's acting like he's well beyond his years. I know it's a different world and it's a tougher world and everything's harder, but there's a certain thing about childhood that is not exhibited in this novel that I think really would have helped it out a little bit more. Um, and then of course Legion, which I think gets the usually gets the award for best of the opening 10. I really enjoyed it. I think it has one of the better stories out of all of them. I think it gives you a good idea of the Alpha Legion and what it's like to have a new Legion joining the Great Crusade. But uh, there's a lot of just words used in it that, not that they're hard to look up and read or anything like that, but they don't seem to fit the universe. It almost seems like Dan Abnett's just trying to fancy it up a little too much, you know. I think the story could have used, and that's the thing. I don't think these books are on a high enough level to require such intense use of a thesaurus or historical terms or anything like that. I get that the Legion that he's talking about here, or the Imperial Guard or Astro Military, whatever you want to call them, the regiments here, they have a special place in society, especially in the Astro Military Society, and I just think that he kind of takes it a little too far, honestly. I lost interest in it due to that. He uses a lot of like slang terms that I guess it's kind of cool, future slang. I got it, but it's too far. He uses the word sept a lot, like this perception that some of these kind of baby psychers have throughout the series or throughout the novel. It just doesn't work, I don't think. And this whole idea of a game within a game within a game, it was a good story. It was nice and contained, and it was different because you got a different perspective, like a guardsman's perspective. It was on a different kind of planet with a kind of different kind of battle being fought, and a different kind of legion. And it was just very different than everything we've read so far. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was great. Uh, I did enjoy it. The second half was different, but I'd say not to give it a pass, but yeah. I'll say this is the one that made me kind of stop for a little bit, and that's why I'm doing this review now. I started book 8, and I'm having a hard time continuing beyond this point. All right, everybody. As a last point here, I just want to go through all the books, give you a few points that I thought about them, what was good about them, what was bad about them, and just the general review score. This isn't like a specific review based on grammar, philosophy, or story content or anything. Just honestly, just how I enjoyed reading it, how quickly I got through it. It's gonna be out of 10. It's pretty much totally arbitrary. Just personal opinion, totally here. So just real quick, we'll start with number one as usual. I'm gonna group them in groups of the first three and then the last four. So for Horus Rising, I'd have to give it an 8.5. I I liked it, but like I said before, it was kind of jarring at first getting into these characters' shoes, and there was a few little missteps in it that I would say weren't exactly something that I can look past. It was a great start to the whole series, but as you find with the rest of them, there was just a lot of moments where they just hit the nail on the head too hard on who the bad guys were, who the good guys were. There wasn't a lot of subtlety to it. The combat was great. The intent was there, but I'd say overall it just wasn't. Um, it was a great start, but it wasn't like a perfect 9.5 or a 10, as you might hear it from some other outlets. But it's worth the read. It really gets the ball rolling, and I think an 8.5 is about right for it. The next one is False Gods, and I would give False Gods a 9 because just the characterization actually is good in this one. There isn't a lot of issue with anything in the book. I do like how they're showing the Space Marines kind of taking on kind of a more evil slant, even if it might be a little obvious. And in this one, the combat really hits its stride. It has, I'd say, just the best descriptors of what Space Marine life is like, what the day-to-day life of a Legion might be like, and really kind of where their Primarchs come in. Um, Again, I don't really like the Horus Fall, but I think that's more a problem with the lore than it is a problem with the writing. The writing does it very well, even if the sort of sequence where it occurs is a little bit on the head. Overall, I think this was a good a good middle story, kind of like in the first Star Wars trilogy. It's definitely the strongest of the three. Um, and following that will be Galaxy in Flames, and this one is to me by far the weakest. It just there's a lot of scenes in it where you really have to suspend your disbelief on these Space Marines and kind of the also all the other people that go through with the heresy. They don't explain it that well. There's too many people that are too willing to commit too much evil without a specific connection to chaos for me to really buy into it. I mean, there's one scene in specific where there's just wholesale slaughter, whereas in the second one, False Gods, there is one specific scene where there seems to be wholesale slaughter on the flight deck. You'll know it when you see it, but it's wholesale slaughter, not with intent, just kind of like brotherly love. It's a scene which involves Horus and the rest of the Space Marines, and they're just doing everything they can to assist their Primarch, and there's some collateral in the way, and it's very believable in that book. In this book, once Horus has fallen to evil, there's just a few scenes where the Space Marines are so willing to commit atrocities across the board. Just in the name of their Primarch, especially considering it's something that the Emperor wouldn't be a part of, and it just doesn't. You have to suspend too much of disbelief, not just in reality, but in what you understand a Space Marine to be, or what the legions aspire to be, and it just it wasn't like it wasn't a fulfilling conclusion, I would say, to the series. There's amazing descriptions towards the end of the book, when all the massacre begins. There's a lot of very good like fighting towards the end of the book, and the ending is great. But the thing is, I don't think the first two acts really solidify the ending, or really are good enough to hold up how good the ending is. I have a hard time giving this one a 6.5 because specifically because the ending is so good, but there's just too much that you have to like let go, story wise in this book to enjoy it. I found myself enjoying every page, but at the same time, as I finished that page, asking questions like, "Why did that happen?" or "Why is this okay?" or this and that. And you don't want to second guess every single page like you have to do in this book, and that and I think just because by this point in the trilogy there was too much of that going on, that I had to I just didn't enjoy it as much. There was too many questions by the end of it, too many swallow your questions kind of moments where you just have to accept what's going on, and I couldn't let that slide. So I could see a 7, but I got to bring it down to the 6.5, just specifically for those reasons. Um, I mean, just some of the characters that were allowed to be amongst the loyalists, it didn't even make sense. I mean, at a certain point, you have to understand that this is happening, and yet they were still trusting everybody with their lives and this and that when there was specific and obvious division sprouting amongst them already. So uh, for for this one, great writing, very entertaining read. super super difficult to swallow story. So the first three, I'd say on average was, yeah, like 8.5. Um, very readable, very good for what they're trying to be, for a heresy novel, for a 40K 30K novel. Um, and honestly, just a good start. Not a great start. Not to me, it wasn't like they were running to a sprint immediately, but you know, if you're looking for something not so heady, this is very good sci-fi that just gives you sci-fi. Moving past that, we will get into Fly the Eisenstein. And this one, again, a 7.5 for rehashing old points, but the second half was fantastic. The characterization was great. The interpersonal interactions between the characters, both on both sides of the Death Guard, the traitor side, and wouldn't you know it, there's actually a few people that don't want to turn traitor. Even, and again, this kind of nails that point home, how few actually turn to the loyalist side. And I know that there's this whole idea that they picked and chose everybody that was going to be not part of the traitors, and they all were killed in the massacre. But it's still so many like Marines to believe that would just so willingly do that. Not even just turn away from the Emperor, but kill their brethren in such disgusting fashion that it's. I mean, at least they do show in this novel that there are some that don't want to fall to chaos. But again, because of the rehashing of the same points in the beginning of the first half of the novel, I'd say 7.5. You can honestly just skip that until you get to the Eisenstein actually just leaves the ISVAN system. And then once you get there, it's honestly a 9.0, 9.5 after that. Like, just eminently readable, very good short story. Kind of really gives you an idea of why the warp is so dangerous, what's going on in the warp that these people are trying to fight. And they finally start discovering what chaos is, that it's, a sentient idea, and it shows what it can do to really corrupt. Um, One particular character is shown falling into the corruption of Nurgle, and I think that whole set right there is just from start to finish. You can't put the book down. But again, because of the first half, I have to knock it down to a 7.5. Uh, then we go into Fulgrim. Like I said, my favorite one. This one's an easy 9.5. I had no issue with this one. Sorry about the F. It's a huge picture. Uh, if I could just do this real quick. Bloop. Nope, that didn't work. Anyways, wait, wait for it. There it is. Anyways, perfect book. As far as Space Marines and 40K is concerned, easily, it was very long. Every moment it was enjoyable. There was such a variety of what was going on in this book. There was combat. There was intrigue. There was some sci-fi terms that you wouldn't expect. There was this weird, like, sensual tone to it throughout the whole thing. There was murder. I mean, there was, it had a little bit of everything, and it felt very chaos, but it also felt very, like, it explained better why the Legion would follow through with this. My biggest nitpick with this book is honestly just how often the word perfect is used. I mean, there's a certain stretch there where you feel like every third word is perfect or perfection, and I get that the Legion desires perfection, but this is one of those times where I'd say a thesaurus would have been helpful, because wow, like PERFECT times to the 15th power. I don't know. I didn't control F it to see how many times it was in the book, but I'm sure there's somebody that has before, and it's just redonkulous and bonkers. But beyond that, from start to finish, the way Fulgrim is characterized is exactly as I expected it. The way they show his fall is uh, more believable than I think Horus's fall, or more in turn aligned with what I would expect it would take to make a Primarch fall to chaos. There's one or 2 points that are just a little too much. One time in particular where Fulgrim's voice is talking to himself while he's battling a Xenos species. You'll see it when it comes out, and you would think that the way he reacts to this chaos influence would kind of tip off the rest of the people around him that maybe he's not so well and that got to do something about it. But it seems that they kind of just go along with it, even though they don't have the chaos taint. Um, so besides that little point and Ferris Manus's actions at the end of the book, I mean, it's just a straight up very good read. The story is good. Each individual character has like a personality that you would believe in a space marine. Particularly kind of in like this Roman style legion that really does take a chapter from, I guess, real life history and how the Romans kind of saw themselves, or as best as I recognize the Romans as having seen themselves. And I think that's kind of why I like this so much. But yeah, the descriptions of everything in the book, the smells, the sights, the sounds, and everything, the feelings of pain and pleasure. It's he nailed it on the head with this one. He keeps using that phrase. Sorry, but it's a very, I mean, like I said before, if anybody from outside the Warhammer 40k universe wants to get like a really good idea of what the 40k universe is about, like the depravity that's seen in this universe, then it's very good. If you like want to take it to a philosophical level to understand um, what humanity is capable of on a personal kind of, I can't think of the word. Uh, it's kind of depraved, just looking for the next high. Like, what? I mean, it really helps you understand that kind of thing. So 9.5 all the way. Read this one first if you need to really understand like what the height of the series can deliver. Read it in line just to keep it. This one kind of re-energized me for a couple more books, but uh, yeah, very good. Uh, Next book was Descent of Angels, and I would have to give this one a 7.5. Kind of like the Fight of the Eisenstein. Half of the book is real good, the other half is not garbage, but you know, more of the same, I would say. The first half was on Caliban. Great, good writing. Poor characterization of children. Other than that, pretty good. Second half, more of that just nailing on the head thing. Like, oh, they're gonna be a split legion later on. Like, yeah, you get it. They kind of, it's not very subtle again on this one, but it's a 7.5. Just read it or don't. I think it's okay either way. If you're gonna skip it, just read the first half to kind of get an idea of what pre-heresy stuff is like. And then finally, we've got Legion, what supposedly is the number one book of all time. No, I give it an 8. Um, it's nice seeing the Imperial Guard get a shout out. It's nice to see how they deal with Space Marine involvement, especially when it's such a new Legion that's not really trusted yet. Outside of that, the characters are very strong in this book. You get introduced to some concepts that are very important in the lore, but overall, I'd say too many characters, too many terms that are just used for sci-fi effect. Like I said earlier, sept. I got tired of reading sept. He septed them so that they all lined up in the shooting position perfectly or whatever. Nah, it's a few of the characters were just kind of drawn out and cliched. Particularly the general. I forgot his name specifically, but while he wasn't a cliche in himself, he was kind of a cliche of other, kind of like Xerxes in 300. It kind of felt like that would be the character that would fit there, and his personal guard, like kind of the immortal style people. I think it drew a lot from cliches and tried to pass them off as like cool, unique ideas for the Warhammer universe. Outside of the Imperial Guard Geno soldiers, I think none of those cliches really worked. But the story was strong. The descriptions were super strong. The battle scenes were great. It was good to see the Imperial Guard be able to hold their own for a while. And honestly, uh, this one, after Descent of Angels, the second half of that one, and then all of this one, I'm burnt out. So I think that would have to be where I stand on the first 7 books of the series. I was hoping that I would be able to kind of run through it and just take them all as they are, but you gotta slow down. I don't know if going to an audiobook might help me out, but as it stands right now, I'm gonna have to move back to Dune for a little bit, or maybe some. some other books, Armor. I don't know. I'm gonna need some more other sci-fi, or maybe even step away from sci-fi for a little bit. I don't know, but I think the series overall, the first 7 books, they're very strong. It was easy to read through 7. The seventh one became kind of a slog, but if you have a Kindle or if you have the time to sit down and actually read through these books, I recommend it. Um, they're easy. They're like easy bathroom reads. They're easy laying in bed reads. There's a few sections where you're gonna actually want to sit down on the couch and turn the TV off and actually read the entire thing. Just get through it. I'd say the end of book 3 was like that. The end of book 5 was like that. The end of book 4 was like that. So that middle section right there was definitely super strong. Um, Kind of like a bell curve of entertainment here on these books. But overall, I'd say read them. Is it worth $105 or whatever that is? Um, no. I'd say I understand now why people uh, are picking and choosing the books based on lore importance and actual like entertainment value. If I was to pick the top 3 out of here, Fulgrim #1, hands down. That's the best one. I'd say False Gods #2 to get it kind of to get you there for the whole heresy and how it begins and how it's working, and Galaxy and Flames #3. Um, I guess Legion #4, Descent of Angels #5, Flight of the Eisenstein #6, and then honestly, Horus Rising #7. I think you can skip that book and you'd be fine in all intents and purposes. Outside of that, that's my uh, 1 through 7 ranking of which ones are important. You can skip all the other 4. The last 4, I think, the top 3 are great. I think they give you a good idea of how the heresy begins. So that's pretty much all I got for those. We'll probably do a spoiler cast here in a little bit where we can talk about more of the details with Alberto. I'll bring him in. He's read them all as well. I think he's read them and listened to the audiobooks, so he's kind of got a double whammy perspective on those. So um, that was really not spoilery. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like or subscribe to these videos if you enjoy what you're seeing. We're going to try and pump out some more Warhammer content because honestly, we're just not playing enough video games. And we're building models like crazy. We're reading these books like crazy. We are painting like crazy. So I'll probably have some openings coming up soon. And I'll show you some of my models that I've been painting and kind of show you some techniques, hopefully. Other than that, this has been Dodo of Mo's Bros Reviews. Please like or subscribe and have a good night.